Wilton's relocation in the 1930s raises curiosity about the home's original location. This virtual reality program recreates the Wilton plantation of the 1780s, located 14 miles from its current location, based on historical maps, legal documents, insurance records, and archaeological studies. Of course, there is still more to learn about the property and those who lived and labored on it, and some subjective determination based on evidence is necessary for this program. Welcome to the world of Wilton Plantation, Henrico County, Virginia. Wilton's North Ferry Landing connected the plantation with the outside world. Transportation vessels, such as a bateau, docked at this landing and ensured Wilton's place in the agricultural trade economy. Trained coopers made barrels to transport staple crops, like tobacco, to their destination. Enslaved boatmen loaded the boats with hogsheads and smaller barrels and oversaw the crop's transportation to warehouses for inspection. Boatmen came into more frequent contact with white people than their peers and likely held greater knowledge of the local market economy. Coopers and boatmen were valued craftsmen whose work ensured a successful sale of product. Wilton was home to one of the largest enslaved communities in Henrico County in the late 18th century. Between 1783 and 1787, the plantation had about 103 enslaved individuals who lived in multiple quarters throughout the property. The largest living quarter, known as the landing quarter, because of its proximity to one of Wilton's boat docks, was continuously occupied by enslaved individuals and families for nearly a century. The enslaved individuals living at Wilton's landing quarter were likely skilled craftsmen such as coopers, blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons. Enslaved Africans and African Americans were active participants in Wilton's story. However, until archaeology was completed at the landing quarter you see here in 1998 by William and Mary, little was known about enslaved life at Wilton. The archaeological data from the landing quarter helped bring Wilton's enslaved community out of the shadows of history. The structure you see here is consistent with barrack-style housing of the period. It dates to the time of Wilton's establishment in the early 1750s and was occupied for at least 40 years. The dwelling's earliest occupants, perhaps numbering 12 to 15 individuals, may have included unrelated adults as well as children. A fire destroyed the structure before 1790. One grave, that of an adult, has been found on this ridgetop just east of the cabin dwellings, but there are potentially others nearby. It is possible the grave is part of a cemetery for the quarter residents. Enslaved Africans and African Americans were active participants in Wilton's story. However, until archaeology was completed at the landing, Wilton was home to one of the largest enslaved communities in Henrico County. Wilton, an impressive example of colonial Georgian architecture and celebrated for its fully paneled interiors, was built circa 1753 for William Randolph III and his wife, Anne Carter Harrison Randolph. Both were members of politically and socially influential planter families. This centerpiece of their roughly 2,300-acre tobacco and wheat plantation was constructed by both free and enslaved masons and carpenters. The exterior of Wilton combined classic Georgian features with future trends in domestic construction. The house is 64 by 42 feet and about 5,000 square feet, and has the appearance of symmetry. The Randolphs labeled the flanking buildings nearest to Wilton House as offices. These buildings often served many purposes, such as office and personal space for William Randolph, and for guests who visited. They also likely stored items that the main house was not using or for which it lacked space. The wooden decoration around the front door features flattened columns, known as pilasters, topped with Ionic capitals, a clear reference to ancient Greek architecture. The triangular pediment over the door features dentil molding, a pattern which is repeated in the cornice at the top of the exterior walls. Rubbed bricks added an element of visual interest around Wilton's windows and doors, and at the corners of the building. These bricks were rubbed using a special stone to remove any surface irregularities and expose the lighter color underneath. Wilton was at the leading edge of architectural fashion with its low-pitched, hipped roof. Hipped roofs were more common in the South and withstood high wind conditions better than other styles. Wilton's bricks are laid in Flemish bond, the most structurally strong and decorative bond, with alternating headers and stretchers. Flemish bond was the bond of choice for architecturally refined buildings in England. Virginia colonial plantation kitchens, run by enslaved workers, were usually detached from the main house, which helped to reduce odors and heat in the big house as well as the spread of fire. Wilton Plantation sat on a steep bluff overlooking the James River. From this view, one could watch river traffic heading to and from places like Williamsburg, the capital of Virginia until 1780, located about 50 miles downriver. Wilton was visible from the river as boats turned the river bend. Evidence indicates that a terrace led down to this bluff, which might have boasted a private garden for the Randolph family. While the Randolph family cemetery has never been positively identified, it is likely located in this general area as well. Welcome to Wilton House as it looked circa 1930, not long before it was purchased by the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America and the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1933, disassembled and moved to its current location in Richmond's West End. As you explore 1930s Wilton, you will notice a number of additions as well as a neglected appearance, the result of decades of financial troubles. The last Randolph owner sold Wilton in 1859, and 5 families subsequently owned the house. Warner Moore was the last private owner of Wilton until 1932, when it was acquired by the Bank of Commerce and Trusts in Richmond. The bank began to receive financial offers from private collectors and museums to buy the wood paneling inside the home. To prevent Wilton's destruction, the Virginia Dames raised enough money to buy Wilton and relocate the house to its current location. Wilton's front, Victorian-style porch represents a Civil War-era change to the mansion. It was added by owner William Knight between 1859 and 1869, replacing an earlier porch on this side of the home. You might also notice that by the 1930s, the distinctive red paint color used on Wilton's wood trimmings was gone, replaced instead by a cream color. In an effort to reconstruct Wilton in its colonial iteration after relocation, additions such as this porch were removed, and the exterior paint was brought back to its original red color once it was discovered in a 2005 paint analysis. Traditionally a Georgian mansion, Wilton transformed over the years based on the owner's architectural tastes and functional needs. The best example of this is Wilton's east side, which by the 1930s boasted a 2-story wing. A porch was added here by the Randolphs in 1806, reflecting a growing interest in the private side of family life. Shortly thereafter, they added a storage room and a sheltered entry to the basement. Between 1895 and 1910, a second, larger wing, like you see here, was built. It was 2 full stories in height and moved the cellar entrance from the east side of the home to the riverfront. George Cornwall's addition replaced the porch and storeroom, likely to provide more privacy, a kitchen on. Wilton's riverside windowsills were lowered sometime during the ownership of George Cornwall between 1873 and 1896. This was a fashionable alteration at the time and afforded a better view of the James River. After Cornwall's death in 1896, Wilton passed to his heirs, who subsequently possessed the wealth necessary to make large alterations to the house, including building the large brick terrace that you see here. Traditionally a Georgian mansion, Wilton transformed over the years based on the owner's architecture. Evidence from a handful of photographs indicates a barn existed here in the 1930s. Irish immigrant George Finnegan, an inventor and entrepreneur who owned Wilton from 1908 to 1925, potentially built this barn and returned Wilton's land to cultivation after it lay for years in a pastoral state. Finnegan went on to clear Wilton's historic fields, purchase a steam tractor, install wells throughout the site, and establish horse and dog breeding programs. By the 1930s, only the remnants of these projects remained. At some point, a brick wall encompassed the front yard of Wilton. The foundation of this wall is all that remained in the 1930s when architect Herbert Claiborne excavated the grounds and created detailed drawings of his findings. The original outbuildings that flanked Wilton in the 1700s were no longer standing by the 1930s. This image is the only evidence that we have of this 1930s structure. We can see the slats near the roofline, which might indicate prior use as a dairy or smokehouse. The windows seem to indicate tenant use at some point as well.